if you look, you can see that my microphone's cut off weirdly for some reason. Let's get out.
And that's that's in OBS, you said?
That's in OBS, yeah. So I got a crop on this group here.
Yeah.
You can start, like I don't mind people seeing these logistics of.
Well, fun fact, we're already live.
So. Perfect. There you go. All right. Well, at least you could see things like my microphone a little better.
Yeah. What's your talk next week, by the way?
So the talk I'm doing next week is embracing low code as a hardcore developer.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's fun.
When I started working for 8base, I've been a hardcore developer for decades now. And when I first was told about 8base, and I was interested, I found out it was a low code platform. And as most developers, you're like, oh, low code. Like, I'm a developer. I just want to do my code. I don't want. No. But as I started looking into the platform and seeing how the low code platform for 8base was built for developers. So the way that low code essentially works is it makes less code for you because it makes decisions for you, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of how it works. The problem that usually happens for developers is that when a low code platform makes decisions, those inevitably end up being decisions that the developer has to hack around in order to solve their business logic.
And you hit limitations usually pretty quickly.
Exactly. So what I liked about 8base and what drew me into them, and now why I'm working for them, is because the decisions that they make are trying to be as unintrusive to a developer as possible. So there's a lot of DevOps decisions. There's a lot of things that the developer shouldn't really have to worry about, while still allowing a whole lot of coding capability inside of the platform itself. So,
and that's honestly like a tough promise to fulfill, like that balance, to your point of like developers not sometimes being interested in low code. And I'm totally the person where if something can get the job done quicker for me, I'm all in. Like I don't care about having to write the code myself. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of products that kind of advertise themselves as developer first, or however you want to phrase it. Yeah. And it's just often a tough thing because it's tough to marry up. Like, here's the original idea of something, and then try to tie that back to developers kind of constantly throughout the feature or like updates, like iteration, whatever it is. Yeah. The life cycle of the software. And it's tough. So I'm excited to see it.
Good. I'm glad. Did you want to go through any intros and stuff? And
yeah, I'll do like just general opening for everybody. So welcome on YouTube and Twitch. If you're listening in and you feel comfortable, let us know where you're joining from. And what we're going to walk through is a product called 8base. And the tagline, the thing that I kind of stole from the website for the title, is full stack low code for JavaScript developers. And you just kind of touched on like the idea of like very targeted at developers because of the limitations that developers often face when they use low code, no code tools. And I've used several. And again, like I am always really interested on anything that can make the development process faster for me. So anyway, if people have questions, comments, leave them in the chat and I'll make sure to bring them up. And then if you want to start by introducing yourself, and we'll kind of talk about like the product and ideas and that kind of stuff, and then just get into hands-on demo.
Sounds good. So my name is Ray Riel. I'm a developer advocate here at 8base. So as a developer advocate, because some people don't really know what an advocate is it's my job to essentially be the voice of the company to the developer, while at the same time being the voice of the developer to the company. So it's my job to show developers how cool the product is, to educate them on how to use the product, to solve any issues that they might have with the product. I go out to talks, and I give talks at conferences. You know, you and I are both going to Refactor DX next week. Not that that's a plug. But so I give talks at conferences. I tend to make them as much not about the company as possible, so we still get the name out there. But you know, one of the things that's about developers is we don't like being sold to, right? So I don't want to try to sell anything. I just want to show some cool stuff, and hopefully, you know, people get interested.
I feel like the quotes coming out of my quotes, they're just like our quotes, right? In Devrel, coming out of your mouth. By the way, like you kind of mentioned, like no plug. I was actually going to plug for people Refactor Conf that we will both be at next week is in Toronto. If anybody's interested and you happen to be in the area, I can get you a ticket if you are interested. So if you happen to be in the Toronto area and are interested in coming and seeing either of us slash both of us talk, then send me a DM and we'll figure it out.
Perfect. And so, yeah, so that's the developer, the voice to the developer. And then at the same time, it's my job to talk to developers and figure out exactly what their problems are, any issues they might be having with us. And one thing that I love about 8base is they've really nailed DevRel properly, because me as the advocate, I'm heavily involved in everything having to do with product. So I'm constantly talking with engineering, and when they're coming out with ideas of like what our next features we should work on and stuff, I'm part of all those conversations to say, no, developers really don't care about that. This is something that they're gonna want immediately.
Yep.
So
I love that. That's often like one of the biggest missing pieces, I think, in DevRel is the opposite of, like, usually we think of outgoing, like speaking at events and marketing and that kind of stuff. But the intake of information from developers to product is super important and often really overlooked. There's a fun comment I think that's really relevant here from Code Wrangler, talking about the key is picking the right tool for the job: internal apps, admin interfaces, low code first, customer facing React, Superbase UI framework. Like picking something that can do the thing that you're looking to do and do it well and fast and efficient and all these things. Yeah. And maybe like we don't even need to jump into that part of the conversation now. Like maybe there are certain applications or certain types of applications that 8base, as an example, is like specifically if you're doing this type of thing, it's going to be way easier to do this, but maybe not for everything. Like I think that's kind of the ideal of like we could build anything with our platform, but maybe it's not everything. Maybe it's for certain types of use cases.
Right, exactly. And I mean, from our perspective, we've seen other low code players where they're very much centered around things like internal apps, right? One of the big issues that's some of the players people have problems with is, for example, like the pricing model, right? They'll have like a per user based pricing model, which means that that's a good niche for internal applications, but if you're planning to build an application that scales out to 10, 50, 100,000 users, you don't want to pay per user pricing on that. That's gonna crush you, right?
Yep.
So for 8base, we don't do per user pricing. We kind of focus more on your actual usage of things, which is good. But yes, there are niches, and there are. I always like to be challenged, so. If someone says that 8base can't do something, I'd like to go out and figure out whether or not it actually can.
Do you want to go from there and do like kind of the intro? Like I think probably the most important part to me, I think, and what people want to see is like hands-on demo. Like what does it do? What does it look like? But do you want to give like an additional 1 or 2 minute context for what are some of the things that are built in? What are the use cases, problems that you're solving, that kind of stuff?
Right. So 8base is a low code platform that is built specifically with developers in mind. So like I said, a lot of the decisions that are made are around the idea of getting a developer up and running quickly without getting in their way. So one of the taglines we like to use is uninhibited development and radical productivity.
Nice.
So we want to be able to get you up and running quickly without getting in your way as a developer, because one of the biggest problems with tools, and especially tools that do a lot of things for you, is that they might not do the exact things that you need to get done. And then, like we were saying before, you have to kind of hack your way around things. So 8base is a full stack platform, which means we'll give you a backend with all of your layers, your data layer, your API layer, your authentication, your functioning layer, and then we also have an app builder on the front end that will allow you to build your front end apps with some drag and drop, while still kind of giving you the ability to code as you need to solve your own business problems.
Cool. Real quick question: since you have it kind of looks like on the website those are kind of 2 separate products, are you able to, as a developer, like just use the backend portion and then consume that from my own code?
One of the great things about it is that you cannot you can't stop saying you can. You're not limited to an 8base front end with an 8base back end, and you're not limited to an 8base back end with an 8base front end.
Oh, cool.
You can connect to any GraphQL or REST API. Well, you can code in JavaScript, so you can connect any way that you want, but we do make REST and GraphQL has built-in support easily there.
Citizen or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I mean, I guess as long as I kick off and keep kind of showing things, you'll see exactly what that is.
Cool. Are you ready for me to bring your computer up?
Yeah, for sure. And
Sweet.
I'm the kind of person that has no problem being interrupted. So as questions come along, feel free to interrupt me with them, and I'll.
Please do. And I'll interrupt really quickly to celebrate. We recruited one person to come to RefactorConf.
Oh, nice.
Code Wrangler is in Toronto.
Perfect.
And hopefully we'll get to. Also, Code Wrangler, when you send me a message, let me know what your real name is, so I can not call you Code Wrangler when.
Yeah.
Or I could call you that if we want to in person too. But anyway, looking forward to hanging out with you and meeting you there.
Perfect. All right. So what you're seeing here is the 8-base backend. Now, in terms of 8-base, we use what's called projects. And so an 8-base project can have just a backend. They all come with a backend. If you don't end up using it, it's not really that big of a deal. But you can have just a backend or a full stack. So the app that I'm working with here is called a CRM Lite app. If you don't know what CRM is, it's customer relationship management. It's basically what salespeople use to handle like leads and stuff. And that's the example that I'm working with. But I found it's one of the easiest ones to show off. So this first right here is the 8-base backend console. Now, it's good to know that if you want to think of 8-base backends, you can think of them as kind of like a single database with an API and all of the stuff built into it. So you can create multiple projects to have multiple backends. And then in terms of an 8-base project, you can actually have multiple front ends. So I can create as many front ends for one backend that I want.
Okay.
We are built on AWS. So our infrastructure in the back, we leverage AWS Gateway, AWS Lambda. We leverage S3 for file storage, and the database layer itself is Aurora MySQL. So it's a relational database.
Cool.
Now, when we go into the data tab, you can see that it's kind of relational right off the bat, obviously, because you have your datas and you have relationships. So in this use case that I always use, I'm going to say that I'm adding events into my CRM app. So I'm showing off the ability to, I want to add a section for my salespeople to add in like conferences and trade shows and stuff that we're going to. So here I'm just moving things around because I noticed that I keep looking over at you on my left screen and then my camera.
I have no solution to this because I've got two monitors that are kind of split apart to fit my camera in the middle. So if I'm doing like a talking head video, like I can talk directly into the camera and I can look at it the whole time. But then when I'm live streaming and I'm looking at my computer, I'm writing code, or I'm looking at you, I can't do that. There's like no perfect solution. I think I'm going to go back to having it like on the outside of one of my monitors.
Oh, I see.
And try to figure out
showing you as a perspective.
Yeah, there's no like perfect solution unless you had a really fancy monitor that had the camera built into the dead center of it, but was also transparent.
Even if we could find someone that's like really good with scripting OBS type stuff and working with cameras, I would love, because I have a camera here and a camera here.
Yeah.
And if I could have it auto switch based on
your eyes,
the area that I'm looking, that would be really awesome.
That's intense. Yeah, that would be super cool. Yeah. By the way, we got a couple of people joining us in India, it's like 11 p.m. It's always cool for me when I do streams and have people joining like super late that are, I doubt they like stayed up to see this, but they're up and they're here. Did. So I'll take it.
Sure.
I'll take it
they
for
were
what it's
like,
worth.
James is doing his live stream. We got to make sure.
It's 100% that. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to start by creating my events table here. So I have events, and when you're creating your fields, we have a bunch of different types of fields. So the first thing to see that's really cool is that there's a lot of auditing fields that are automatically generated. So you have your ID, created by, and
basic stuff updated. Yeah.
And these are automatically populated by 8-base. So when you update a record, it's automatically updating that. When you create a record, it's automatically creating that. You don't have to worry about that as a developer. Now, when you're adding in other things, so I have a name for my event, we have kind of the standard field types. So we have like a text field, but right away you're able to start playing around with what can actually go in that field. So we can say plain markdown HTML.
Oh, interesting. So you already have like almost like feels like it's geared towards like headless CMS idea of like when you start leveraging like markdown, that feels like content that you're putting in there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so you can have field sizes as well, choose your mandatories, provide a default value if need be, and you can even create calculated fields right here. So
Okay.
if you wanted to just have it
Calculated
calculated.
being like built on other properties or something, like what would calculated
Yeah,
look
so
like?
like for example, in this app here, you know what? I'm going to say this is a standard field, and I'm going to say create, just to get that app there. So if I look over in, I think it's my leads. Is it my leads? No, opportunity. Yeah, so opportunity here, I have a state, and then I have a probability percentage. And this probability percentage is calculated automatically, and it's a whole case statement. So when it's qualification, when the opportunity is in qualification, then it's got a 10% probability.
Once there. Okay, gotcha.
Right.
And so that like this is one of the interesting things for me when I look at like no code platforms. So that snippet that you wrote, one of the challenges I've seen in using other platforms is figuring out like how do I write those? What's the documentation for them? Oftentimes they're like specific to the platform, etc. Do you have any background on like how you come up with that specific statement?
I got to check with engineering to be sure, but I'm pretty confident that this statement is SQL based.
Okay.
Right. So this is a SQL case statement.
Cool. And I wouldn't be able to like I write very select star. Like I don't.
Right.
And
yeah.
I
No.
work for
I
a
know.
database company, and I don't write SQL.
No, me neither.
So I'll take your word
when
for
I
it.
was doing all the SQL, it was just like if I do a select star and I let the API layer handle everything. Right.
I'm curious how many people like just question for the chat. How many people write SQL on a regular basis / would consider themselves to be intermediate or better competent with SQL? And I would I would be like beginner. I could teach somebody that's never written SQL, and that's about
so you're
it.
talking about like views, stored procedures, triggers, like the really nitty gritty.
Yeah,
of the data layer, right?
Not for me.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I'm going to add another field like website, and you can see we have things like number, right? So the really easy stuff. Let's say I wanted a budget field here. This is my system.
By the way, I got distracted. I checked my email, and I have one from Wrangler talking about meeting up next week at RefactorConf. Wrangler,
Excellent.
am I allowed to say your name on stream? Hopefully I can. Rainier, rarely, but I do no code, low code mostly as well. Never need it there. Yeah, fair enough.
There you go.
And that's what with things like Prisma, for example. Like I'm a big fan of Prisma and Supabase and these tools that like give you JavaScript SDKs to be able to work with all these things.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Code Wrangler said I'm okay to mention his name. So Code Wrangler is, I think it was Mark. Well, let me confirm. Yes, Mark. Anyway, Mark, I'm looking forward to meeting you.
All right,
next week.
We'll see you there, Mark.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the other cool things, so we've got the standard like text, number, date, time, that stuff. One of the cool ones that I really like here that we have is the switch field. Now, when you originally look at it, you see on off, and you're like, okay, that's just a Boolean field. Like, don't be so excited about it.
It's a fancy
right?
name for Boolean.
But there's a custom. And so essentially, what I love about like this feature
enums in this one.
You're putting your enumerations right into the data layer, right? Because one of the issues you have is that like you have to manage it from the data perspective, and then your API has to maintain your enumerations, and then that has to make its way to the front end, blah, blah, blah. Here, your enumerations are sitting right here on the data layer.
That's cool.
And then using the API, you're able to pull those enumerations down to like the front end. So in my CRM app, I've got a bunch of drop downs that get populated
to show the options
from the data layer.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right.
So does that probably behind the scenes? That's actually creating the event type or the like whatever the name of that is. It's like creating a separate table for those options.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I would imagine.
And it's doing a lot of its own work. So another thing to show here, I'll show you. There's files. So let's say we had assets for our events. Right. We can choose file. And then all of your file storage happens through the API. So you don't have to worry about setting up S3 or any other online cloud storage and working with that API. It's built directly into 8base as well.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something you don't have to worry about. And then because we're relational from a database, if I wanted to add an association, let's say like I wanted my users to be attendees to that event, in our UI, it's just a drag and drop.
Oh, that's cool.
Right.
Even from other assets. That's cool. So really quickly, an additional question there. So what if someone didn't know that like you could drag and drop from other tables on the left? Do you have like a drop down inside?
Yeah. So what I could do here is I could instead I could say attendees, and I can choose table right there.
Okay. And then
And
it'll
then
ask you
here
your
I can
table.
select
Yep.
the users table.
Cool.
And then over on the user side, that's going to be events that they go to. And then
Cool.
you can see
The
here,
relationships.
let's say other events, because I think I already have a field. And then set your relationship. So one-to-one, you can do one-to-many or even many-to-many. And then as a developer, you don't have to worry about setting up your join tables and creating your foreign keys and all that stuff. It's just a drag and drop to create that association, right?
I'm gonna give you one hot take.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that hot or not, but it's like every time I see stuff like this, I just wonder why we ever create databases with raw SQL ever. Like why does this not exist for every tool ever? Like obviously I get not every platform has like it built in and stuff, but I just don't understand why we don't do it this way almost everywhere all the time.
You know, we got used to having just databases, and then you had your proper data UI, like your data management application, and that's what you used, and then people tried to make it better. But nowadays, as a data provider, like it's really kind of an essential thing to have. Like, why wouldn't you have it, right? Although you look at big ones like AWS, where it's like, well, we're not about giving you a front end, right? We're about giving you the DevOps that you need, and you can handle that.
You do the rest
yourself.
Which is why we see like so many products are built on top of AWS, which is what you have, right? Like you start off the stream by talking about like we've built this platform on top of the infrastructure of AWS because it gives you all the things, but then makes you do all these things that we don't want to do and we don't feel like we should have to do on a regular basis, which is why you see so many successful platforms just built on top of that underlying technology.
And that's how us as a low-code platform get the job done, right? Like just in this data layer, we've taken away your necessity to figure out where you're going to store your data, kick up a database. We handle being production ready. We handle scalability, so you don't have to worry about any of that. As soon as you go into production, we're making sure that your stuff stays up and running properly, right? Which is another thing about some low codes is that they're very amazing for prototyping, but then when it comes to being production ready, not so much. So that's one of the things we also pride ourselves on.
Yep, fair enough.
Over here in this UI too, you have a data section. So if I wanted to add events manually, I could say that we're going to refactor DX.
So here's the other half of my soapbox is this should exist everywhere as well. I don't know why we don't, like you could have it behind admin so you don't have access to the wrong person, etc.
Right.
Like why does this not exist for every database ever? Like I just feel like it should.
No clue. But no, I agree with you. It definitely should be there. So let's say we're adding those rows in. Another thing to show is that there's a CSV import capability here. So if you have a bunch of data, then you can do that. Also going to that conference in Wisconsin.
You going to that conference?
Yeah, I'm going to that conference.
Nice.
My first time doing it, but it's...
Oh, okay. So I'll hype it up for you and everyone else. That conference is one of my absolute favorites. I've become pretty good friends with Clark, the founder.
Yeah, Clark.
And the whole team. He's amazing. They're amazing. I did Austin back in January. I've done that conference in Wisconsin several years in the past. And anyway, everything that conference is absolutely amazing. And I'm drinking iced coffee now, but that conference is also my coffee sponsor. So like the coffee I had earlier before the iced coffee was that conference coffee, which is super, super cool.
Oh, yeah.
So if anybody's looking for other amazing conferences to go to, Refactor Conf, that conf. I also have the discount. I have to look up what it is, discount code for that conference in the future. If anybody's interested, let me know.
It's, it's my first time going, but when I heard about it, I was blown away. I was like, this concept is so awesome. Yeah. Not just from the fact of like, oh, it's like a camp thing. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But also the idea that, it's like a conference where you can bring your kids to it, right? Yeah. And they have things for the kids. It's not like bring your kids and then we'll put them in a pen somewhere. Yeah. No, like they have things built out for them, and the whole thing happens at a resort, which is with that has like water slides and stuff. So if the kids aren't interested in that, they can still go off and do something fun, right?
Yep. It is so much fun.
So it's a cool conference. I'm very excited for it. And that one I'm doing my talk called All Things Functions, where I just kind of dive into all the nitty gritty parts of a JavaScript function. Because,
oh, sweet.
Yeah. So for example, like it's very difficult for anybody to properly explain what the this keyword is in the context of a certain type of function. So that's one of the things I really dig into.
Love it.
Yeah.
Also, sorry, I have to pause and shout out. Jason Langsdorff just rated over on Twitch with a party of 34. Jason, thank you. I appreciate it. I can't remember if I like have these set up or not. Does this come through to
Are
you,
you
Ray?
trying hotkeys? Oh yeah, I got the clapping. Yep,
Nice. Yes. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Jason is doing tons of awesome stuff, specifically with Learn with Jason live streams and all the content that he does. And I'm a big fan. So thanks. For people that joined, Ray is the guest today, and he is talking about 8base, which is a full stack low code platform for JavaScript developers. And we're just doing kind of hands-on demos while also talking about conferences that we're going to and pet peeves and soapbox stuff. So we're just hanging out and chatting. If you just joined us, send us a message and let us know where you're coming from or like your background or like whatever it is you want to share, ask questions, but feel free to just jump into the conversation. But thanks again, Jason, for bringing everybody over here.
Hey, everybody. All right. So the next really cool thing is like, so as a developer, when you're starting a project, right, you start with your data layer, you get some data up, and then you need your API layer, right? Mm-hmm. Now, typically, as like a hardcore developer, you're now kicking up a node instance, is installing Express.js, creating your endpoints and stuff. One of the cool things is that as you're building out your data layer here in 8base, we're automatically generating your GraphQL API. So if you noticed, we created the events table, and now you look here under your GraphQL queries, and we have an events list GraphQL API, GraphQL endpoint. So I can come in here and say, I want my names, my event types, the date times, the budgets, right? And my data is already coming at me.
And this is so important question here, which is cool. PJ is asking on YouTube side, GraphQL on the free tier, nice. So this is all on the free tier, like everything you're doing that we're showing people is on the free tier?
Yeah, everything at the moment is on the free tier. All of all of your development and stuff you can do up on the free tier, and it's really when you start wanting to get into serious deployment and production ready stuff. That's when you start looking at the different plans.
Okay. Can I ask you? This is a side question, and this is me being selfish. On your list, you had Confu, the conference in Montreal.
Yeah.
I had a trip planned to go to Montreal. It fell through like back in February, which is a long story. I'll tell you sometime when we're in person. I would love to go. Are you speaking at Confu? And do you have any idea like if there's a CFP or anything or someone I could reach out to like express my interest?
Yeah. So Jan's the one that runs Confu out in Montreal. Okay. I spoke there last in February, nice. The last one that they had. And I'm probably going to be applying again because it's just one of those conferences that in our area, because I'm in Ottawa, mm-hmm. Montreal, Toronto, like Confu is one of the bigger ones in this area. So we tend to all apply to that one and try to get in. I don't think the CFP is open yet.
Cool.
But I'm keeping an eye on it, and I'll be submitting to that one most likely as well. It's a really fun conference. They do a lot of tracks, so you're gonna have a lot of information that you can choose from.
Yeah. Again, sidetracking. Separate question. Do you speak French?
I can order McDonald's.
Okay.
No, I speak a bit of French, not enough to consider myself like
a native speaker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But
nice.
So my name is Ray, but my real name, like my government issue name, is René Jacques, which is incredibly French,
which
and
sounds
means
very
I should
French.
be speaking a lot more French than I do, but unfortunately not.
One additional, I keep like too many things to talk about. Nikolov, who's in the chat on Twitch, he is in Toronto. He'll be at RefactorConf, so we will all get to see each other next week. And then
excellent.
Depeche, 40-something graphic designer, transition into dev. Appreciate your content. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. If you have any additional details like on your background that you want to share, your interests and stuff, feel free to put it in the chat. But thanks for being here. All right. Sorry.
No worries.
I get sidetracked a lot. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. So just from creating the table, we have queries to get a list of events, to get an event. We also automatically have mutations. So I'm already able to create, destroy, update, delete data right from 8base. I didn't have to do any coding as a developer to get that done. Yep. And we also have subscriptions. So if you're trying to create a real-time front-end application, you can leverage the GraphQL subscriptions in order to do that properly.
Are subscriptions, is that like a newer standard in GraphQL? Like, or has that been around? Like, I don't know the context of subscriptions.
Yeah, I don't know how long that's been around GraphQL, to be honest.
But that's exciting though.
Last company that I was at, we were an event streaming platform. So real time became very important.
Yep.
but that was very much like a hardcore event streaming. So it was like,
Yeah.
it was a server that like banks use and the stock exchange uses
Okay.
so that was like some hardcore stuff. I'm really not sure how new subscriptions are to GraphQL.
Okay. I just heard about that in a podcast episode that was talking about, Amy, my podcast co-host, would appreciate this. She works for them now. Redwood JS, the framework, is now either because they are like kind of built on GraphQL, like that's one of their opinionated choices. And they either have subscriptions or are looking to add subscriptions. So I just happened to hear that like term in the GraphQL context like 3 days ago. So anyway.
Well, I mean, one of the big things that I like to do when I'm talking to developers about this is make sure that they don't gloss over GraphQL. So if there's anybody on this stream that, you're used to REST because REST is a standard and that's what we all do, I suggest taking a serious look into GraphQL because the power behind it is amazing. When you're used to the REST world, then you're used to this concept of, okay, my page needs to show this entity. So I make a request and I get back all of the information of that entity, regardless of whether or not I want it. And then if that entity has like sub entities, like, I don't know, there's users associated to it, I now have to go back to REST again and request that exact information of those users, get all of their information back, which can be a really big security problem. Just to be able to create this one page. Whereas with GraphQL, you can see here that I'm only choosing what I want to come back in my query. And further to that, like we saw that we had this attendees association to the users table. In this one query, I could say, I don't just want the event information, I want the first name and last name of all my attendees. And that comes back in the exact same query.
Yep.
So it's a much more powerful API standard to use for your front ends than the rest that we're all used to. And from an 8-base perspective, we build in everything. So you can filter down all your data, group your data, sort your data. We have this whole, not the Explorer, where's the other one? The documentation section. Mm-hmm. So as you're building out your API, all of your GraphQL information gets put in
data types and stuff.
So you can look through your documentation to figure out exactly what your API is doing.
And then I'm going to jump ahead a little bit so we don't have to go down that path. But just for addressing this now, so you've created all these different like CRUD operations, mutations is like queries and mutations in GraphQL. Mm-hmm. But you created all these things by default. We're not there yet, but you have the ability to like control those down to an authentication and authorization level.
Exactly. So I'm really, that's the next thing that I'm getting into is the fact that, the next thing that a developer does is I've got my API layer. Now I want to lock it down. I want to make sure that only the right kind of people can access the right kind of data. So we've built in RBAC into our system. So role-based access control kind of handles everything. Perfect. So let's say in our example, my salespeople, right, they have access to events and it defaults to all records, but I can choose whatever I want. So I can say they can see all records. I could say they can see only user records, which is user records that they've created themselves. Mm-hmm. I could say no records at all, or I can leverage custom filters. And what custom filters does is digs into that data itself to determine whether or not they should be able to see it. So right now it says if it's created by. So if it's the person who created that record, they can read that. What I can do is I can change it and I could say if the event has attendees and in the attendees, one of the attendees, the ID of that attendee equals the logged in user. Yeah. Right? So now I've made it so that can you leave that if you're attending that event? Yeah. So if you're attending that event, then you'll be able to see that event as a salesperson.
That's so cool. So a couple of things I want to call out that are really important here. Syntax here is new/different. So this is like a JSON syntax where I'm sure there's like good documentation around like, here's how to nest these queries or define these queries, et cetera, or these like custom things. Another aspect of this is like Soapbox, all RBAC should have these kind of at least high level buttons of saying like, yes, no, if you're the owner, like at the very least, because that's something we need all over the place. And this is really cool because one of my fears with tools like this is that syntax being very specific. I mentioned this earlier, not being able to find like how to put it all together. One thing that jumped out at me is you have IntelliSense inside of here for the things that you have access to, which is a huge step forward in just making sure as I type stuff, at least I'm getting suggestions on what are the different things that I can do.
Exactly. badass. Autocomplete it should be everywhere. I don't understand why it's not.
Another soapbox. Why does it not exist everywhere?
Yeah, exactly. So we have that. Another thing to show really quick is that with that RBAC, we also have conditional not conditional. What's the one where and or? What are those called?
Logical.
There you go. We have logical built in. So for example, like my leads table, right? I could say a sales manager can see leads where they've created them, where they're the owner, or where the manager of the owner is them.
Cool.
Right?
And that's
so using that
that gets
or,
super powerful really quickly.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
And then the final really cool one to show, I don't know why I've never put this field in here, but let's say, for example, we, for some reason, we keep track of social security numbers for contacts. Let's say we're working with some medical stuff in our CRM. So we have their social security number. Our RBAC goes down to the access, it goes down to the data level. So I can say here that I don't ever want any sales managers. They're able to access all of this data, but they will never be able to see a social security number.
That's perfect.
So RBAC is
That's
not just at the
powerful.
record level.
Yeah,
it's at the
the property field.
right?
Yes. Yeah. That's really good.
And the last cool thing to note about that, because this is very big from a security perspective, is 8base is an API first model, which means all of the stuff that you're seeing here, all of the stuff that our backend is doing, works on the same API as what you're working with your system, including the RBAC controls. So you could, if you wanted to, create a developer role and limit their data access inside of the backend here.
Okay. Yeah.
So you could have developers coming in and troubleshooting production data while still keeping things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, that kind of stuff secure.
That's cool. And that's like the two different contexts. Like you have the users of the application that you build, then you have the users of the platform who are going in to edit things, and you can control who and where, who and what access to what people have.
Exactly. Down to the level of your people as well, not just your users, right?
Yeah.
So that's an important one. In terms of authentication, we do have our own in-house authentication. So if you don't have an IDP and you're trying to find one, we can provide you with identity. If you have one already, like Auth0, or I'm going to say any reputable one, because if you're working with an IDP that doesn't support OpenID, you should probably look at finding a different one. But we support OpenID. So if you want to plug your IDP in for authentication purposes, you can tie that into your RBAC right away.
Did you know I worked at Auth0, by the way?
Yes, I believe I did.
Yeah. Shout out to Auth0. My wife still works there, by the way, doing events and sponsorships for the DevRel team.
Oh, that's awesome. I got I know some people. I know that I can never remember whether or not where Joel's at now. I know
Joel was there
I think he's at
a
Mongo
while
now, right?
ago. He's at Mongo now.
Yeah.
Also Canadian.
Yep.
Nearby for you, I guess.
Yeah. He lives in Ottawa too.
Yeah, cool.
We have like a little core people in the Ottawa area, but we also started, we call it the Canadian meetup. So because we got my buddy Tamimi out in Vancouver and stuff, but a lot of it is really just this area, the Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. It's like a weird triangle, right?
Yep. Is that where, do you know Ryan Chenke?
Yeah, I know Ryan. I can't remember if he's from, I think he's from this area. I don't know if he's still here though.
Yeah. He also, fun fact, worked at Auth0 several years back, and then was at Prisma, and I think is now continuing to do his own thing.
Auth0 just has hired everybody in the DevOps space, I think.
I know.
All right. So the last thing from an authentication perspective to show is we do have API tokens. So if you're creating something that works with like IoT and you want to create a token for a server that doesn't log in, you have that capability here to create the auth tokens. All right. So the next layer, usually what developers say is, oh yeah, your API is so awesome. You auto generate blah, blah, blah. But an API is more than just CRUD. You can't APIs have specific business logic that I need to code in order to get the job done. Right. Otherwise you're hacking around the way that we were talking about. So we have what's called custom functions. And custom functions is essentially a serverless function layer that we've put into our system. Also JavaScript, our entire stack is JavaScript. And it gives you the ability to create 4 kinds of functions. The first kind of function is called a resolver. And if you are new to the GraphQL world, a resolver is basically a custom, it's like a function that gets executed and works as an endpoint inside of your GraphQL API. So as an example here, and clearly I need to authenticate Copilot, I have this convert leads function. And what this function does is it takes one lead as an entity, as an ID, and then it converts it into an account and an opportunity and a contact, and then deletes the lead, right? So I've created this resolver, and when I deploy, it actually becomes available as a mutation. So
and this is basically your ability to define custom API endpoints for
exactly.
Like that
this
level,
allows you to
and
extend,
that translates to GraphQL mutations.
This allows you to extend your GraphQL API beyond the typical CRUD that we automatically generate for you.
Which is often one of those limitations that people see is like, okay, here's the things we give you. Then you don't have that input to like,
good luck. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, to do more. Yeah.
So the second type of custom function we have is what's called a trigger. And a trigger allows you to execute a function either before or after data mutation. So here, this is an example of a function that I created. It's a before trigger, and before a lead is deleted, this function will execute and determine whether or not you're doing a destroy or a delete. And we don't allow destroys in our system. So if you try to do a destroy, we say, no, you're only allowed doing soft deletes. So that's an example of a before trigger. And after trigger, you could be like, once an entity is created or updated, you send an email out saying, hey, go take a look at this record. Some changes have been made, right?
Cool. And just for people who maybe haven't seen this before, the idea of a soft delete, or before that, when you delete something, typically it's gone. Soft delete is the idea where you leave it in the database and you mark it with some sort of flag that basically says like hidden or deleted or something. So it's the data's still there, but it's flagged to the point where it won't be queried in the stuff that you typically query, but the data's still there, at least probably for a certain period of time. Like you might go through every 30 days and wipe out all the soft deleted data or whatever.
Which is, typically you would do that if you are trying to like make sure things don't get deleted for backup purposes. There's some auditing and security reasons why you might need to keep data around. There's a bunch of different reasons. Although we're hardcore developers, we just kind of delete everything willy-nilly without caring.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
That's why we have source control.
I know. There's a question from Rainier. So all the functions are created for the backend, but there is not a question. Is there a way to connect them or set them up in the backend UI, like a workflow or something? I'm not sure I followed all of that, but the functions, and you can clarify the question, the functions that get created here are hosted in your backend. We haven't gotten to anything front end yet, but presumably you could consume that in the visual builder in your platform. Also, you could consume that from your own custom project that you write somewhere else as well.
Yeah. So I mean, and I don't know if maybe they were talking about like a pipes kind of. Remember Google Pipes and how you could piece things together? Maybe that's one thing they were referring to.
Yeah.
From our perspective, from the back end, all you really see is the list of functions, and we have logging in there. So with this, with our functions, you can track the logs in case you're running into issues. In terms of from the front end, that's like a resolver is like an API endpoint, right? And so that's how you'd be able to access that. Let me go through the other two function types, and that maybe will help clear some things up. So the third type is a task, and a task can be done one of two ways. It can either be scheduled, kind of like a cron job, have that function execute at a certain time, or you can create a task without a schedule, and that can be used in order to run things asynchronously. So if you have an incredibly long task that you don't want to hold up your thread, you can have a resolver that calls this task, and then that task runs in the background.
Okay. And that probably, idea of like asynchronous programming. Like I want to make sure this thing gets done, but I don't need to like wait for it to get done because it takes time. So I'll just kind of throw that message off. Maybe it's using queues or something behind the scenes, or maybe not. But we'll put that thing off to be executed, and that can run asynchronously.
Exactly.
Rainier's question, I think I'm kind of getting this now, their question. So in some low-code platforms, you have like drag and drop visual builders to kind of create an API endpoint, for example. Like You can drag in like send an email, save a database record, email the person. Like you can drag and drop those
Right.
things.
Okay.
I think in this case, you're writing that code to do this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. We have it like in our feature list to start creating like function, almost like function templates, right? Things that like, this is what you need to get done easily. And people always do this type of function. So create it. And so we're working on that type of thing. At the same time, as a developer advocate, I'm always like, if you have some cool code, we have a community. You can always post that in the community, and people will be really happy about it.
Yep. Cool. There's another question on Twitch, by the way.
Sure.
Is there a way? It's from Nate. Is there a way to prioritize certain queries to incrementally load data, similar to the way of using defer directive, or would that not be done in custom functions triggers? I'm trying to make sure I fully understand that one. I'm not sure if I
And in terms
fully
of,
get that one yet.
I mean, in terms of is there a way to prioritize certain queries to incrementally load data, similar to the way of using a defer directive? Or would that be done in the custom functions and triggers? I mean, I don't know if I'm understanding the question correctly. It kind of sounds like the idea of maybe pagination type of, like, if
I was kind of wondering about that too.
a long query. Our queries like the ones we automatically generate have things like pagination built in there. So you have first, you have last, you have skip, and so you have the ability to paginate with the queries themselves. So that's one way to get it done. I guess also I haven't really looked enough into the subscriptions about whether or not because the subscriptions work off of WebSockets, so it's possible that you can stream data incrementally that way. But I have to look more into the specs of GraphQL subscriptions.
Cool. Yeah, Nate, if you have any like clarifying questions, feel free to add those too.
Yeah, please do. Where was I? Okay, so the last function that you can create is what's called a webhook. We call it a webhook, and it's essentially your ability to create a REST endpoint inside of 8base. So if you're working with a third-party library that's expecting a REST webhook, like a third-party service, and they're like, we need a REST endpoint to feed data to you, you can use a custom function to create a webhook. So when you create that function and you deploy it over here on the function side, and I really should have an example, but I don't, we'll give you like an endpoint for you to hit.
To hit directly, yeah.
Yeah.
Where does that code live, by the way? Does that live in like a GitHub repository?
So we let you manage your own code from that perspective. So like you should have your own Git and your own repositories in order to store all of that. That's one of the things I've brought up with engineering is kind of that idea of we are giving a lot in terms of housing everything in one place. So we should explore the idea of whether or not we'll provide that. But you have companies like GitHub where there's so much power and capability with Git that, we can try to reinvent the wheel, but we're not sure whether or not you'll care so much, especially since you're already paying GitHub for GitHub Pro, right?
Yep. So is there some point in here where you actually connected your 8base project to a GitHub repo?
So from a repo, well, what I've done here is I have a GitHub repo here, and then we have an 8base CLI, and I typed help wrong.
I was going to say, is the command really helpo?
Yeah, it is. No, so we have an 8base CLI, and the CLI allows you to do things like we'll automatically, let's say I wanted to create a webhook, right? 8base generate webhook test hook, call it that. So you could do that, and it'll automatically create all the code, all the like the file structure that you need to get that webhook happening.
Cool.
Right?
Do you have access to like your database types too, like the stuff that you create in the Visual Builder? Do you have like TypeScript types for that you can reference?
Like does it go out to the GraphQL API?
I guess so. Yeah, and get types down.
Yeah. I don't think we have it yet. It's definitely on our list of things to get done though, for sure. Because IntelliSense inside of VS Code is pretty awesome.
Yep.
So I'm not sure we have that yet. I'd have to look through and make sure. But yeah, so once you have all of your stuff, you just do 8base deploy. When you first create an application, and then if you like clone your code and you're coming back in, you do an 8base configure, and it'll give you a list of all of your projects, your 8base projects, and you just choose the one that you're working with. And then after that, it's just a matter of hitting 8-base deploy, and it builds locally and all your code goes out. So it builds locally, which basically means that you can use whatever NPM that you want, right? We don't handle any NPM stuff on the back end. We build on your local system and deploy it into 8-base. So if you're working with private NPM repositories that you don't need going out to the public, you don't have to worry about that with 8-base because we deploy locally.
Cool.
Or we build locally.
Another comment in the chat from Rio, basically talking about like the dependency of people being tied to cloud services like AWS and not understanding why people do that. One, like that's a pretty hard thing to avoid in general these days. Like no one is really, or very few people are continuing to run their own data centers, continuing to run their own like infrastructure like that. Most places and most companies and most products are doing exactly what this is doing. Like so many things out there are just built on top of AWS or Azure, Google Cloud, whatever. I would say that's like, it's just the most reasonable way to go. And it's interesting when people start to get opinionated about like potential like vendor lock-in or however you want to phrase that. Like those sort of things, like there are certain things that you just become dependent upon. If it works for your company or your product to just run your own data centers, which I've been in that situation at FedEx where we had servers specifically to run applications at different airports. Like that's totally fine. But it also is just like, this is probably the most common dependency that you could have going forward in architecting software as a whole is leveraging one of the major cloud providers out there. And then if this type of thing doesn't make sense for you, that's also totally fine. Like if you can build all this stuff easily and quickly on your own, that's great. But there are use cases for people, like I've said before, like if anything can help me build something quicker. And I've talked about being a fan of like drag and drop table editors and relationships and all that sort of stuff. There is like absolute use case for that sort of thing for lots of people.
Yeah. No, there's always people that really love getting into the nitty gritty and not having to rely on things. I mean, we rely on things every day. Even if you choose not to, if you don't want to use a cloud provider and you want to run your own servers, well, you're going to be relying on your power provider to provide power to your servers, right? I mean, or you can set up, solar panels and then you can run everything off of solar, but then you're relying on the sun in order to make sure that you still get the power that you need, right? I mean, we have reliability at some point, always. And, when it comes to cloud services and the providers that they have, it's just one of those things that, the majority of the industry has decided this is a thing that makes sense to rely on is the cloud providers, right?
And that threshold of like how many and what things do we depend on, that changes for everyone and every company and every product. And anyway, that's a technical decision for people to make along the way.
There are some people who want to rely solely on serverless. There's some people, who was it that just came out with an article about how they saved a bunch of money by going back to a monolith structure, right? There's who was it? Was it Uber?
I don't know. I didn't hear that.
No, it was Amazon. It was somewhere in Amazon where they decided to do that. I think it was Prime. Amazon Prime, they decided to go back to using monolith instead of serverless for everything. Yeah. Because from a video perspective, it just made more computational sense to use monolith than it did to use serverless. But yeah, so those standards are there, but cloud is really just one of the ones we've all decided on. Is like the 6 minutes a hard stop that we're doing? Yeah.
We can go a few minutes more if you want, but I probably keep it quick after that because my wife's been on baby duty for a couple hours. So I want to go help her. So.
I got that. All right. So we're like, I'll demo the front end really quick. So this is our app builder. And this is kind of an ability that we've given to developers to build a front end quickly without sacrificing a lot of needs from a developer perspective. So, we have the ability to create pages and create layouts. A layout is basically your ability to have like your header and your nav sit across multiple pages without having to worry about anything. So I'm like creating an events page here in terms of, you have your canvas here with a lot of drag and drop capability. If I want to start editing from like a styling perspective, let's say I have my page here and I have a style section where I can start saying, I want to have like a 32 pixel padding all around, and I want to give it a background of, where did I copy paste that? I got that sitting here. Okay. So I want to give it a background of this color, right? So one of the things that we've done for developers is we've taken this concept of the styles, and this is very much, we've given a point and click here and we've tried to choose some of what we think are the most common styles for these types of components. So here we've got a page component. We think these are some of the common styles. But as a developer, we know that you have your own stuff that you want to do and you don't want to be inhibited. So for every component, you still have this custom CSS down at the bottom. And you can just plug in whatever CSS that you want. So we do our best to give developers an easy way to do some of the more common things while still providing them to code the way that they need to. Let's see another example here. Oh, getting data in, right? The next thing you're going to want to do is try to get some data in. So we have our resources, and our resources, the backend that's tied to this project is already sitting here. And if we want to add any of our other 8-base backends, we can just point and click to them, and it's super easy to bring in. If you want to add any REST or GraphQL APIs that aren't 8-base, you can just come in, provide a base URL, any authentication parameters you might need to, and hit save, and then your REST API is just sitting there to use at any point, right?
And that you kind of mentioned this early on, like you could use this front end part completely independent of the 8-base backend if you're consuming stuff from an external REST API.
So if you didn't want to use these 8-base backends at all, you could just get rid of them and not have to worry about them.
Yep.
And just use the REST API you want, the GraphQL API that you want. Once you have your resource, then you want to create your requests. And we have two states. We have a global request and a local request. So a global request you would use for data that you might want throughout the entire application. So for example, like the user info to populate up at the top right, I would have like a user info. I'm sure I have one sitting here somewhere. But if I have my events page and I know I'm only going to get events from this page, I can create a local request. So I have my local request, and I can come back to my backend and pull out this events list query that I was using in the API Explorer, create a non-lazy query. And then when that gets run, I have the event data sitting here in the front. So it's really just a matter of, creating my initial resource, which is then going to be used throughout the entire application. I only had to create it once. And then creating the request for the data that I really want. And get events. And I was able to use the API Explorer to just quickly pull up an API request, like a query, and bring it down in here. And then the next question becomes, okay, well, you have the data, but now how do I get it, right? Where's it sitting at after this query has been executed? And this is where we have our state. So if you're used to React, you should know, you probably have a good idea what state is. We have, once again, global and local state. So if you create a local request, your state is going to be local. If you create a global request, your state is going to be global. So here we have this local one that says get events. The other things we show in state are things like all of the requests that are available, the resource information, your router information, so what page that you're on. That could be useful for things like breadcrumbs and stuff like that. And then you can also create your own custom state variables in order to work with state that way. So now that I have the state, I want to get my events, and I actually want to get them on this events page. So I can create a typography here, and I'm going to call this events, and I want this to be an H1. Now, if you saw here, there's also this property. The first pane is the properties pane. And this you can kind of think of as like your HTML attributes, right? Any property that you have that's associated to the component will be here. And once again, we give you some of the common ones and the ones that we think are important to a component. But if you want to add any, you just use a custom property. So let's say accessibility is really important to you, and you want to put area labels on all of the important elements that need area labels. You can create a custom property that's area label, set that value the way that you want.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So just another example of how we try to make it easy without inhibiting you.
Yeah.
So we give you some that's the common stuff up front, and then we allow you to change it any way that you really need. So the one component that's kind of important when you're working with data, especially iterative data like lists, is we call it a looper. And the looper gives you the ability to iterate through some data. So here I have my get events request, and I'm going to copy my connection to the items, and I'm going to use handlebars here. So if you're used to handlebars, are you aware of handlebars? Yeah.
Templating language.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use handlebars here, and we can paste that in. And one thing I always like to do is optional chaining to make sure that my code is safer. And so here I've said, let's iterate through all the event items and have it in our looper. And then once we start adding things in, so let's say we add a container into the looper, you can see now we don't have one thing, we have 4 things because we're actually showing off the live data. And then we could do things like go to our looper and say we want to show things as a grid, right? So we want to show it as a grid, and we want the templating to be 1FR, 3 across. So we want things to show 3 across.
And that's just regular CSS,
yeah,
right? Like you're just typing
regular
in
CSS values, right? 24 pixels for my gap, and I've got the gap there. And then for each of my containers, right, I want these to have a nice 8-pixel border radius, and then also, give it like a white background to differentiate from the rest of the page, right? So you can see that just with that list, we're building out everything that we really want for the individual list. So here I can have that, and then I can use handlebars for the text and say, put the name of the event there. And now the event name is sitting.
Cool. You can style that and then do date and
all the exactly. Other things if I wanted to put the date in, and then if you wanted to work with front-end third-party libraries, so for example, I've got Moment inside of this application, so I can just do Moment item dot date time format /date not a question mark. That and now my dates are in there, and I can come over here and just change this to be like a body 2.
And how did you get do you have npm packages that you can choose to add in places?
So that's one of the things that we're working on at the moment is that we have some libraries automatically built in here, and there is a way to. So one of the things is if you're working with a library you really want to work with, you have direct access to your header code as well. So you can plug things in with script tags the way that you need. But one of the features that we're working on right now is the ability to provide custom libraries and custom components into the front end.
Okay.
So awesome. Once that's out, it won't just be the fact of the libraries, but here you can see we have a lot of common components that you see, right? Especially from the material UI. But the feature that we're working on right now is the ability for you to bring your own components in. Because that's kind of the next big step with this is people love what we're doing here, but they have a lot of their own components that they want to bring in. And so that's kind of our next step is to give them that ability to bring their own components in here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is there anything else I want to try to throw at you while I have a second? You could see that as you're working with things, you have the ability to go into code and do what you need. And that ability for code works with everything. So if you wanted to, for some reason, dynamically set the identifier of each of your HTML components, you can do that through code. All of the capabilities of setting properties here are all, you can set code for any of them. You can also work with, so the way to work with events is let's say if I wanted this container, when you click on it, it opens up into a new window, right? So you have your events, and these events are all kind of the standard eventing that works with those components. You can do a navigate. You can run one of the requests that you've created over here. You can run a custom function that you've created over here, which I'll go to in just a second, or you can run custom code directly there. And I could say,
so do whatever you want. Yeah.
Window.open item dot website, and I can never remember. Is it new? Is that the target?
I've never used window.open, so I don't know.
Oh yeah. Just dated myself, didn't I? But yeah, so then that's how all of your eventing works. If you want to create reusable code with functions, we have this function section. And again, there's a local and a global context for these functions. In terms of if you need static assets into your application, you can add them through assets and then reference them in code. From a styling perspective, so you can style individual components.
And
We
have
also
like
have
root
a color
styles.
palette here for you to work with.
Yeah.
You can set the typography. So you saw I was like hitting H1, and you can either customize your H1 like this, or you can do it directly in code like that if you want to. And that works for like all of your typography stuff. If you have a style sheet that exists already for your organization and you want to plug it in, we have global custom CSS here. So you can really just copy paste whatever styling you want here that's necessary. There's also font management. And then because responsive design is such a big thing, we have our media queries. So here you have the ability to set what your different
Breakpoints are.
breakpoints are, yes, for your media queries. And then over here, you can change your viewport. And with the edit media queries, you can actually plug in your responsive styling. Cool. I think that's everything. Oh, so once you have everything ready to go, then you can just come up to deploy here, hit the deploy button. You'll get something that you'll get a URL that looks like this. And that gives you, the app that you were working with. Right. So the app that I was just creating, and this is with our hosted login as well. You have your app available now. And then obviously if you want to change this, we give you the ability to fix your deployment so that you can set whatever URL you want, upload your SSL certs, that kind of stuff. That Sweet. Is the gist of it.
Yeah. That's probably the most entry points to writing custom CSS or JavaScript that I've seen. Like they say, it's like everywhere you go, you have the ability to inject.
Exactly.
Inject the custom. Yeah.
And that's our whole credo. We want to make a developer's life easier, but we don't want to get in their way. We want to be the low code platform that doesn't, my marketing team doesn't like me saying this, but we take the crap work. We take the crap work out of being a developer, right? You don't have to make decisions that you shouldn't have to make as a developer. One of the things I like to say is that, we started out being front-end developers, and then we could be front-end and back-end, and we got full stack, and then full stack stopped being just being a developer, and you became a DevOps person who needed to figure out how AWS worked and blah, blah, blah. We're getting you back to being a developer again, where you really just have to focus on solving the business problems without having to focus on the cookie cutter code of like creating a standard API that you always create.
Yeah, it is. Anytime I think about starting a new project, it's always like the majority of the getting started is doing the stuff that just has to be there.
Exactly.
That is not very unique, but
let me get my stack up and then I can start doing the fun stuff, Yep.
Yeah. Agreed. Cool. Someone asked to follow you on, I'll put your link to Twitter. Is that the best link for you personally to share for them?
Yeah, I mean, my home address too, but I'd rather you not share that.
That's up to you.
If you can just go. No, yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm on Mastodon as well, although I haven't fully mastered Mastodon. I'm still working on it.
Haven't even gotten into Mastodon yet. Now there's Threads. Is that what it's called? Is the new one that Facebook launched or whatever?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't even know that one.
Like in
another thing.
Yesterday, I think. Yeah, it's all over the place.
I'm assuming it's invite only, right?
I think it's not, but I'm not sure about that. Like I haven't. There's too many things to try to get into all of them, so I'm still, even though it's sketchy right now, I'm still holding strong on Twitter. But I imagine one day I'll end up moving.
Yeah.
Threads or nothing, Stefan says. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for joining, and thanks everyone else for watching and joining, asking questions, commenting as well. It's super fun. What would be like the number one? Like I can throw a link to 8base itself. And
8base.com is like our main area. Sign up for a free account and start playing around with everything. Docs.8base.com is your documentation. We have 8base Academy, 8base.com/8base-academy. I gotta get a subdomain on that one to make it easier. But that is where we have a whole bunch of video content on getting up and running in 8base. 8base is on YouTube, and then we have community.8base.com. And community.8base.com is our our discourse where you can go and ask questions, get answers. I've insisted that our engineering team is on the community, so the answers aren't going to just come from users, but also from us.
Cool.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And then anyone who's coming to Refactor, I'll see you. We'll see you at Refactor. I'm also going to be doing that conference. I'm going to the International JavaScript Conference in New York.
In New York, nice.
Yeah, that's in September. Any other ones to plug? Come on, Miro, get up. Okay, there you go. JavaScript and Friends in Columbus, Utah JS in
cool.
Sandy, Utah.
Also cool.
And I just got approved for Momentum, the developer conference in Cincinnati.
Cool.
Yeah.
Michael, the creator of Momentum, is a good friend of mine I met him at a few different events, but we've been at that conference a couple of times, I think, together. He's awesome. Yeah.
I'll make sure to say hi.
Yeah,
Introduce
absolutely.
myself.
You should. He's really awesome. And I've heard nothing but really good things about Momentum, so I'm sure you'll enjoy that one as well.
Perfect.
Cool.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm going to go wrap up and help my wife with baby.
All right, good luck with that.
Yeah. All right, everyone, thanks for joining. We'll see you all later.